The convoy was 30 seconds from the bridge. 3 of the world's best snipers had already taken their shots, 3 misses. The target was still alive, still moving, still about to vanish into a fortress where no bullet could ever reach him again. The wind screamed at 40 knots across the valley. The distance was 2,900 meters, nearly 2 miles of impossible mathematics and prayer. And Captain Sarah Mitchell, lying in the dirt with her finger on the trigger, had exactly 1 round left, 1 chance to do what 3 men couldn't. No backup, no second attempt, just her, the rifle, and a shot that belonged in the realm of miracles. What happened next would either rewrite the record books or haunt her for the rest of her life. The sun had been climbing for 11 hours, turning the Afghan desert into a furnace, and Sarah hadn't moved more than an inch in all that time. Her ghillie suit, woven carefully with dead brush and local grasses, made her invisible against the rocky outcrop where she'd buried herself before dawn. Sweat pooled beneath her body armor, soaking through her undershirt, but she didn't shift position, didn't scratch the itch crawling along her spine, didn't blink. Away the salt stinging her eyes. Movement was death, patience was survival, and right now, patience was the only thing standing between her and failure. Through the spotting scope mounted beside her rifle, she watched the road below. It carved through the valley like a scar, winding between jagged hills and disappearing into heat shimmer 2 kilometers south. That road was the only way in or out of this godforsaken corner of Helmand province, and for the last 16 months intelligence assets had been tracking one man's movements along it. Colonel Rashid Qasim, chemical weapons specialist, architect of the attacks that turned 4,000 civilians into statistics. Women, children, entire villages erased by nerve agents while the world watched and did nothing. Until today. Viper 1. This is Overwatch. The voice in her earpiece was calm, measured, professional. Captain Jim Torres, operating from a forward observation post 15 kilometers east with the tactical operations team. Target convoy just departed checkpoint Alpha. ETA to your position is 4-5 minutes. Confirm you copy. Copy, Overwatch, Sarah whispered, her voice barely louder than breath. Years of training. Made it instinct. Never speak at full volume in the field, even when the nearest living soul was miles away. I'm set, waiting on target. She'd earned this position through a shot. Most people still didn't believe. 2 years ago, in the Korangal Valley, a Taliban commander had been directing an assault on a coalition outpost from a compound 2,400 meters away. The wind that day had been biblical, strong enough to bend trees and send equipment tumbling across the firebase. Every other sniper had packed up, calling it impossible. Sarah had studied the wind for 20 minutes, watching how it moved through the valley, reading it like her father taught her to read Montana storms when she was 8 years old. Then she'd taken the shot. 4 seconds of flight time. The bullet had curved. Through the air like it had eyes, compensating for wind drift, elevation drop, air density, even the rotation of the earth beneath it. The commander dropped mid-sentence, and the assault collapsed within minutes. Command called it a miracle. Sarah called it Wednesday. But this was different. This was 2,900 meters in a crosswind that couldn't decide which direction it wanted to blow. This was Ayvaz C, a target moving at highway speed inside an armored vehicle, and this was a shot she'd only take if 3 other snipers, all of them legends in their own right, failed first. Viper 1, be advised, Torres continued. Eagle 2, Eagle 3, and Eagle 4 are in position at their assigned hides. You are designated final backstop. You will only engage if all 3 primary shooters fail to neutralize the target. Acknowledged Overwatch. The words felt heavy in her mouth. Backstop, last resort. The Hail Mary they'd only need if everything went wrong. And in her experience, everything usually did. Sarah had grown up in the mountains outside Missoula, where her father ran a hunting guide service and taught her to shoot before she learned cursive. Mule deer at 400 yards. Before breakfast, elk at 600 by sunset. By 16, she could read wind patterns better than men twice her age, could judge distance by eye within 10 meters, could tell you the ballistic coefficient of a dozen different bullets from memory. The army recruiter who showed up at her high school called her a natural. Her father called her driven. Sarah just called it normal. This was what you did when you grew up where the nearest neighbor was 3 miles away, and dinner often depended on a single well-placed shot. Ranger School at 23. Special Operations Sniper Program at 25. Now, at 31, she held the record for longest confirmed kill by a female sniper in U.S. military history. Not that records mattered out here, lying in 110-degree heat with a rifle that weighed as much as a small child. Out here, the only thing that mattered was whether you could make the shot when it counted. She ran her hand along the rifle's stock, feeling the familiar contours. Custom-built, .38 Lapua Magnum with a 27-inch match-grade barrel. Schmidt & Bender 525x56 scope with tactical turrets. She'd zeroed and re-zeroed until she could dial adjustments in her sleep. The ammunition was hand-loaded, 250-grain bullets she'd weighed individually, powder charges measured to 1/10 of a grain, each round seated to within 1/1000th of an inch. At 100 yards, this rifle would put 5 shots through the same hole. At 2,900 meters, that precision would spread to maybe 30 inches, assuming she did everything perfectly, assuming the wind cooperated, assuming physics decided to work in her favor. A lot of assuming for a shot that would define her career one way or another. The mathematics scrolled through her mind like a meditation. At this range, the bullet would drop approximately 1,500 inches, 125 feet. It would be in the air for 5.2 seconds, plenty of time for a vehicle moving at 50 kilometers per hour to travel 70 meters. She wouldn't be shooting at where the target was. She'd be shooting at where the target would be, leading him like a duck hunter leads a bird in flight, except the duck was doing 60 and the hunter was nearly 2 miles away. All stations, target convoy now 30 minutes out. Torres's voice had picked up an edge. This was transitioning from theory to reality. 3 vehicles, black SUVs, armored, target confirmed in middle vehicle. Rear passenger seat, positive ID from satellite imagery. Sarah pressed her eye to her scope and began the final systems check. She'd already ranged multiple points along the road below, using a laser rangefinder to build a precise distance map. She'd logged the temperature, 38 degrees Celsius at ground level, probably 33 at her elevated position. Humidity sat at 21%. Atmospheric pressure was holding at 113 millibars, standard for this altitude. All of those numbers mattered. All of them would affect where her bullet went. But the wind was the nightmare. It was gusting between 35 and 45 knots from the northwest, creating chaotic eddies and swirls as it funneled through the valley terrain. She'd been watching those wind patterns all morning, studying how the air moved, where it accelerated around ridges, where it calmed in the lee of hills. There was a section of road, maybe 400 meters long, where a low ridge would partially block the wind. That was the golden zone. That was where Eagle 2 would take his shot. Eagle 2, comm check and status report. Eagle 2, good copy. Range is 2,100 meters. Wind is 8 to 12 knots at my position. Manageable. I have a clean sight line to the kill zone, ready to engage. Master Sergeant David Chen, 43. Confirmed kills across 3 deployments. A legend in the sniper community. The kind of shooter other snipers studied. 2 years ago in Syria, he dropped a target at 2,300 meters in conditions so difficult that the after-action report was still used in training courses as an example of what was theoretically possible. If Chen couldn't make this shot, the odds of anyone making it started to approach 0. Eagle 3, comm check and status report. Eagle 3, solid copy. Range is 2,400 meters. Wind is stronger at my position, but holding steady at 20 to 25 knots. I'm locked on and ready. Staff Sergeant Monica Reeves, British SS, on loan for this joint operation. Because someone high up the chain decided this target needed an international touch. Sarah had trained with her 2 years ago at Fort Benning, and they'd held a position together during a 12-hour siege in Mosul, taking turns on the rifle, while insurgents tried everything short of artillery to dig them out. Reeves had ice water in her veins and could shoot in conditions that made other snipers pack up and go home. If Sarah had to trust anyone with this mission, Reeves was in the top 3. Eagle 4, comm check and status report. Eagle 4, 5x5. Range is 1,800 meters. I own this shot. The confidence in Lieutenant Marcus Webb's voice wasn't arrogance, it was mathematics. Former Marine Scout sniper, now with Delta Force, and his position gave him the shortest range of the group. But his angle was brutal, shooting almost perpendicular to the convoy's direction of travel. His lead calculation would be pure trigonometry, and there was no room for error. And then there was Sarah, silent, at 2,900 meters. The ghost nobody wanted to need. The backup plan for when the universe decided to remind everyone that Murphy's Law was still in effect. All Eagles. Target convoy now 20 minutes out. Prepare for engagement sequence. Remember, intelligence confirms target is wearing level 4 body armor. Headshots only. I say again, headshots only. Sarah's jaw tightened. Of course he was wearing armor. Why would this be easy? A center mass shot gave you an 18-inch target zone. A headshot, even counting the whole skull, maybe gave you 7 inches. And that was on a stationary target. On a moving target at extreme range, that margin of error shrank to almost nothing. She made micro-adjustments to her scope, checking her dope chart one more time, even though she'd memorized every number on it. The ballistic data was precise, but precision didn't mean certainty. At this range, a 1 mile/hour error in wind estimation would push her. Bullet 18 inches off target. A 5-degree error in temperature would change her point of impact by 6 inches, and she was trying to hit a 7-inch target that would be moving at 70 feet per second. The sun beat down. A lizard scurried across the rocks 3 feet from her face, oblivious to the drama about to unfold. Somewhere in the valley below, a bird called out, its cry echoing. Off the hills, normal sounds, a normal day, except that in less than 20 minutes, this patch of desert would become a place where history bent, where one man's life would end, and thousands of other lives might be saved, if she could make the shot. If. Target convoy now 15 minutes out. All Eagles weapon status check. Eagle 4, weapon hot. Eagle 3, weapon hot. Eagle 2. Weapon hot. Viper 1, weapon hot. Sarah's rifle had been ready for hours, but protocols were protocols. The safety was off. A round was chambered. The scope was dialed to exactly 2,900 meters. Every piece of equipment had been checked and rechecked. There was nothing left to do but wait and watch and hope that Chen or Reeves or Webb made their shot, so she wouldn't have to attempt the impossible. Through her scope, she could see the road section where the engagement would happen. Just asphalt and dust and empty air. In 15 minutes, that emptiness would be filled with vehicles and violence and the physics of copper and lead traveling at supersonic speeds. One way or another, this mission would end there. Visual confirmation, 3 black SUVs approaching from the north at approximately 50 kph, middle vehicle confirmed as target package. Sarah spotted them, tiny dark shapes shimmering in the heat distortion, still miles away, but closing. They looked so small, so far away, like toys on a distant shelf. Hard to believe that inside one of those toys sat a man who'd orchestrated the deaths of thousands. Harder still to believe that she might be the one to end him. Eagle 4, target entering your engagement zone in 90 seconds. Stand by. Webb would have first chance. His range was shortest, but his angle was the hardest, shooting across the convoy's path of travel rather than down its length. The lead calculation would be extreme, and he'd have maybe a 2-second window when the middle vehicle passed through his optimal firing solution. Miss. That window and the shot became exponentially harder. Sarah had run the numbers herself during mission planning. Webb's shot was difficult. Hers was bordering on impossible. She controlled her breathing, slowing her heart rate through sheer force of will. It was a technique she'd learned from an unlikely source, a Buddhist monk she'd met during a deployment in Nepal, an old man who'd taught her. That the body could be commanded like a machine if you knew the right language. Her pulse dropped from 70 beats per minute to 54. Each breath became deeper, more measured, pulling oxygen into her blood while keeping her body perfectly still. The rifle became an extension of her skeleton, motionless, waiting. The minutes crawled. Sarah's world contracted to the circle of glass in front of her right eye. Everything else ceased to exist. The heat, the discomfort, the insect crawling across her left hand. There was only the scope, the reticle, and the empty road that wouldn't be empty much longer. Eagle 4, target entering engagement zone in 60 seconds. Prepare to engage. Through her scope, she watched the vehicles grow larger, taking shape from mirages into solid metal and glass. They were moving fast, kicking up rooster tails of dust. The lead vehicle was slightly ahead, probably running point security. The rear vehicle hung back, covering the six, and in the middle, surrounded by armor and distance and the arrogance of a man who thought himself untouchable, rode Qasim. Sarah had studied his file until she'd memorized every detail. Born in Damascus, educated. In Moscow, trained by Russian special forces in chemical warfare. He'd started small, a village here, a rebel position there, testing his weapons, refining his techniques. Then the attacks got bigger. A marketplace in Aleppo, a hospital in Homs, a refugee camp outside Idlib, where 300 people died coughing blood while their lungs dissolved from the inside. The international community issued statements. The UN held meetings, aid organizations counted bodies, and Qasim kept working, kept killing, kept perfecting his craft, until someone decided that statements and meetings weren't enough, until someone drew up a target package and assembled a team, and sent Sarah and 3 other shooters into the desert to deliver a different kind of message. Eagle 4, target in engagement zone, you. Green to engage. Take the shot when ready. The radio went silent. Sarah knew what Webb was doing. She'd been in that exact headspace hundreds of times, watching through the scope, breathing, waiting for that perfect moment when all the variables aligned, when the crosshair settled exactly where it needed to be, when the wind paused and the target moved into position and the universe held its breath. That moment lasted forever and existed for no time at all. It was the space between heartbeats where the impossible became possible. 30 seconds passed. 40. 50. The convoy was moving through Webb's kill zone, and Sarah could imagine him tracking the middle vehicle, leading it, calculating the exact point where his bullet and the target would intersect in 3-dimensional space. And time. Taking the shot. The words were calm, almost mechanical. Then silence. The kind of silence that pressed on your eardrums and made time stop. Miss. Target vehicle swerved at the moment of trigger brake. Round impacted windshield frame, passenger side. Target is alerted. Repeat, target is alerted. Convoy is accelerating and beginning evasive maneuvers. Sarah felt her stomach drop. If the convoy knew they were being engaged, everything changed. No more predictable movement, no more steady speeds. They'd be weaving, accelerating, using the lead and rear vehicles as shields. Every sniper's nightmare, multiplied by extreme range and impossible wind. Eagle 3, target approaching your engagement zone. Be advised, convoy is now executing tactical evasive maneuvers, estimated. Speed 70 kph and climbing. Adjust fire solution accordingly. Reeves would have to completely recalculate. At 70 kilometers per hour, the vehicle would be traveling 19 meters per second. In the 4.7 seconds, her bullet would be in flight. The target would move 90 meters. And that was assuming constant speed, which was no longer a safe assumption. If they accelerated or decelerated during her bullet's flight time, she'd miss by yards. Eagle 3, target entering engagement zone. You are green to engage. Another silence. Sarah found herself holding her breath, as if that might somehow help Reeves across the kilometers between them. She imagined her friend, calm, focused, probably not even sweating, despite the heat, tracking the weaving convoy through her scope, trying to find a pattern in the chaos, trying to predict the unpredictable, taking the shot. 1 second, 2, 3. Sarah counted them without thinking. Old habits from countless hours on the range where you learn to track your bullet's time of flight by feel. Negative impact, target vehicle executed hard evasive maneuver just before bullet arrival. Shot passed within 2 meters, there. Accelerating hard speed, now 85 kph and climbing. 2 misses. The convoy was getting faster, more erratic, and they still had to pass through Chen's engagement zone before they'd reach Sarah's impossible firing solution. 800 meters where anything could happen, where they could turn around, where they could get off the road entirely and disappear into the rough terrain where no shot would be possible. Eagle 2, prepare for immediate engagement. Target is executing aggressive, evasive action at high speed. Wind at your position is gusting. You will have one opportunity before they exit the valley to the south. Chen was the best of them. If anyone could salvage this mission, it was him. Sarah had watched him shoot in competitions, had studied his technique, had listened to him lecture about the philosophy of extreme-range shooting. He approached it like art, not just science and mathematics, but intuition and feel. He could read wind patterns other people couldn't see, could sense when a shot would work before he took it. But even art had limits, and physics didn't care about reputation. Eagle 2, target entering engagement zone. Convoy speed now 90 kph with continuous evasive maneuvers. You are green to engage. Through her scope, Sarah could see the vehicles now, really see them, close enough to make out details. They were flying, dust clouds streaming behind them like comet tails. The middle SUV was weaving between the lead and rear vehicles, using them as cover, making any shot a threading the needle proposition. At this speed, Chen would have to lead the target by over 100 meters. He'd be aiming at empty desert and trusting that the universe would align. I have the shot. Taking it. The radio crackled with the declaration. Sarah watched through her scope, tracking the convoy, waiting. 1 heartbeat, 2, 3, 4. Negative impact. Target vehicle swerved hard right at the critical moment. Bullet passed clean. There. Accelerating beyond my maximum effective range, I do not have a follow-up shot. 3 snipers, 3 bullets, 3 misses. The mathematically improbable had just become reality, and now it was Sarah's turn to attempt the mathematically impossible. Viper 1, you are now primary shooter. Target convoy will enter your engagement zone in 90 seconds. Be advised, they are moving at approximately 95 kph with aggressive random evasive action. Wind at your position is gusting up to 40 knots from the northwest. This is the last interdiction point before they reach the fortified compound. You are cleared to engage at your discretion. Sarah's mouth went dry. This was it. The moment that everyone had said would never come because one of the first 3 shooters would surely make their shot. The impossible scenario that was now her impossible responsibility. She wanted to key the radio and say something, acknowledge the order, but her voice had abandoned her. Instead, she just pressed her cheek harder against the rifle stock and began the calculations that would define the rest of her life. 95 kilometers per hour. That was 26.4 meters per second. Her bullet would take 5.2 seconds to reach the target, which meant the vehicle would travel 137 meters during the bullet's flight. She'd have to aim almost a football field and a half ahead of where the vehicle was when she pulled the trigger. And that was assuming constant speed, which was laughable given their evasive maneuvers. But speed wasn't even the biggest problem. The wind was at this range, with 40-knot gusts from the northwest. Her bullet would drift almost 6 meters, 20 feet off course. She'd need to aim 20 feet to the left of where the target would be, at a point that didn't even exist yet, while compensating for 125 feet of bullet drop and hoping that the wind didn't shift in the 5.2 seconds her bullet was in the air. It was impossible. Literally. Mathematically, physically impossible. The variables were too extreme, too chaotic. There were too many things that could go wrong, and not enough things that could go right. The laws of probability said she would miss. The laws of physics said she should miss. Every rational part of her brain said, don't take this shot, you'll fail, you'll add your name to the list of people who couldn't do it. But Sarah had never been particularly good at listening to the rational parts of her brain. She watched the convoy through her scope, studying their evasive pattern. Left swerve, right swerve, left, brief straightaway right swerve. It looked random, but nothing human was truly random. The driver was following his training, and training meant patterns. Even chaos had rhythm if you watched it long. Enough. She'd learned that from her father, watching elk move through the mountains. They never walked in straight lines, always weaving, always alert. But there was a pattern to their movement, a cadence you could predict if you were patient enough. 60 seconds, Viper 1. The pattern held. Left, right, left, straight, right. She watched it repeat 3 times, confirming the straightaway. It lasted about 2 seconds, maybe 400 meters into what would be her engagement zone. That was her window. That was her shot. If the pattern held, if the driver didn't change it up, if the universe decided to cooperate for once. Too many ifs, but ifs were all she had. Sarah began adjusting her point of aim, moving the reticle to a spot on the road where nothing existed yet. A ghost point in space. That would intersect with the target vehicle in exactly 5.2 seconds, assuming the pattern held, assuming her calculations were perfect, assuming the wind cooperated, assuming she didn't flinch, didn't jerk the trigger, didn't make any of the 1,000 small errors that could turn a perfect shot into another miss. 4-5 seconds, Viper 1. Her finger found the trigger. The rifle felt alive. Beneath her, humming with potential energy. She'd built this specific round 3 weeks ago in a climate-controlled room, weighing the powder to the nearest tenth of a grain, seating the bullet with micrometer precision. It was as perfect as human hands could make it. Now it just had to fly true through 2,900 meters of air that was trying its hardest to push it off course. 3-0 seconds. Viper 1. The wind gusted hard. 42 knots according to her handheld anemometer. She adjusted her aim point again, moving the reticle even farther to the left. She was now aiming at a point that was 137 meters ahead of where the target was and 7 meters to the left of the road. She was aiming at empty desert, at nothing, at a point in space-time. That would only matter if everything went exactly right. 20 seconds, Viper 1. Target entering engagement zone. You are green to engage at your discretion. The convoy roared into her field of view. The SUVs were moving fast, really fast, weaving like angry hornets. She tracked the middle vehicle through her scope, watching the pattern. Left swerve, right swerve, left swerve. The straightaway was coming. 2 seconds, that's all. She'd have. 2 seconds to take a shot that 4 snipers combined had failed to make. Her heart rate dropped to 48 beats per minute. Her breathing steadied to 4-second intervals. Her finger took up the slack on the trigger. 3 pounds of pressure, then 4, then 4.5, right at the breakpoint waiting. The vehicle swerved left. Hard. The pattern was holding. The straightaway was next. Coming up, now. The vehicle straightened out. The driver probably thought he was being unpredictable, but he just made himself predictable. Sarah watched the SUV track perfectly, straight for half a second, confirming it wasn't a fake, confirming the pattern. She stopped breathing. Her heart paused between beats. The entire universe contracted to a single point, the Via Parisi, intersection of her crosshair, her bullet's path and a moving target 2,900 meters away. She pressed through the trigger brake. The rifle roared against her shoulder, the muzzle brake channeling the blast sideways in a concussive wave that kicked up a cloud of dust. Her hand moved automatically to the bolt, cycling it smooth and fast, chambering another round, even though she knew she wouldn't need. Either this shot worked or it didn't. There would be no time for a follow-up. The bullet left the barrel at 915 meters per second, nearly 3 times the speed of sound. It climbed into the sky on its ballistic arc, fighting gravity with every meter. At 500 meters downrange, it was still supersonic, generating a shockwave that rippled through the desert air. At 1,000 meters, it began to slow. Significantly, the air resistance that had been negligible at shorter ranges now becoming a major factor in its flight. At 1,500 meters, the bullet passed through a thermal column, a rising pillar of superheated air that bent its trajectory slightly to the right. At 2,000 meters, it hit a crosswind gust that pushed it back to the left. The bullet was now more than 30 meters above the desert floor, still climbing on its parabolic arc, beginning to wobble slightly as it transitioned from supersonic to subsonic velocity. At 2,500 meters, gravity was winning. The bullet reached the apex of its trajectory and began falling, accelerating earthward. The rifling-induced spin was degrading now, and the bullet started to yaw, tilting slightly off its axis, losing stability. It punched through. Layers of air at different temperatures and densities, each one bending its path microscopically. Sarah kept her eye glued to the scope, tracking the convoy, even though she couldn't see her bullet. 5 seconds felt like 5 hours. The middle SUV was in its straightaway, moving fast but predictably. She'd aimed at a point 137 meters ahead of where the vehicle had been when she fired. The king. Mathematics said the bullet and the target should arrive at that point at the same instant. Mathematics also said this shot was impossible. So maybe mathematics didn't know everything. The SUV was approaching the point. 100 meters away. 75, 50. And then, Just as the bullet reached the final second of its 5-second journey, something happened that Sarah would spend the rest of her life trying to understand. The driver, perhaps spooked by instinct or sixth sense or the ghost of a thought, swerved, hard right. Exactly the wrong direction at exactly the wrong time, or the right direction, depending on your perspective. The 250-grain projectile, traveling at 450 meters per second, after its long journey through thin mountain air, passed through the exact space where the driver's head had been, a quarter second earlier. It should have missed completely, should have punched harmlessly into the desert and buried itself in sand and anonymity. But the evasive maneuver that saved the driver's life moved someone else's head directly into the bullet's path. The round struck Colonel Rashid Qasim at the base of the skull, traveling slightly upward at the angle Sarah's extreme elevation had demanded. The hypervelocity impact created a temporary wound cavity that destroyed the brainstem before the neural tissue could even register damage. Qasim was dead before the electrical impulse of pain could travel from the impact site to his brain. He simply stopped existing, transitioning from alive to not alive in a span of time too brief to measure. The driver, panicking from the sound, and the impact and the blood, jerked the wheel hard. The middle SUV slewed sideways, clipping the lead vehicle's rear quarter panel. Both trucks lost control, spinning in clouds of dust and debris before tumbling off the road in a grinding crash of metal and shattered glass. The rear vehicle managed to stop, its driver slamming the brakes hard enough to leave black streaks on the asphalt, but by then, it was over. The mission was complete. The target was eliminated. Sarah watched it all through her scope, and she felt nothing. Not victory, not satisfaction, not even relief. Just a vast emptiness, like she'd expended something essential in that trigger pull and hadn't gotten it back when the bullet found its mark. Impact. Confirm target is down. I say again, target is down. Torres's voice came. Through the radio, and for the first time in the 3 years she'd worked with him, he sounded shaken. Viper 1, confirm you took the shot? Sarah's voice felt like it belonged to someone else. Affirmative, Overwatch. 1 round, 1 kill. But even as she said it, she wondered if it was true. She'd aimed at a point 137 meters ahead of the target. The target had swerved into her bullet's path. Had she made an impossible shot? Or had she made an impossible miss that the universe had corrected? Had some instinct, some subconscious calculation, told her that the driver would swerve exactly when and where he did? Or had she just gotten lucky in a way that would never happen again in 1,000 years? She would spend the rest of her life not knowing the answer to that question. All stations, target is confirmed, Kia, I repeat. Target is confirmed, killed in action. Mission success. Exfil will commence in 30 minutes. Outstanding work, everyone. Viper 1. That was... Torres paused, seeming to search for words. That was something nobody's going to believe. Sarah safed her rifle and began breaking down her position. The ghillie suit came off in sections, revealing her sweat-soaked uniform beneath. She packed her equipment with automatic precision, muscle memory from 1,000 training repetitions, but her hands were shaking. Not from fear or adrenaline. Those had drained away the moment the bullet left the barrel. They were shaking from something else, something she didn't have a name for, the weight of having done something that shouldn't have been possible. The vertigo of standing at the edge of probability and taking a step into the void. 3 hours later, she sat in the debriefing room at Forward Operating Base Serpent, surrounded by the other 3 snipers and a collection of officers who all wanted to understand how the impossible had just happened. Colonel Patricia Hayes, the mission commander, stood at the front of the room with a laptop, displaying ballistic analysis software. The screen showed Sarah's shot rendered in 3 dimensions, a red arc climbing into the sky, curving with the wind, falling back to Earth to intersect with a blue line representing the target vehicle's path. At 2,900 meters, Hayes said, her voice carrying the measured tone of someone trying to remain professional while discussing something that defied professionalism, accounting for all environmental variables, vehicle speed, evasive maneuvers, and the limitations of human accuracy. The mathematical probability of successfully engaging this target was calculated at approximately 0.3%. Captain Mitchell, I honestly don't know whether to put you in for a medal or a psychiatric evaluation. That shot shouldn't have been possible. Chen leaned back in his chair, shaking his head slowly. I ran the numbers 6 different ways during the exfil flight, even accounting for the target's evasive maneuver bringing him into the bullet path. The timing had to be perfect within 1/100th of a second. If he'd swerved 1/10th of a second earlier or later, the bullet passes clean. If the wind had gusted 1 second sooner, you miss by 2 meters. If your muzzle velocity was off by 10 feet per second, you miss. There are 50 variables that all had to align perfectly, and they did. Reeves was looking at Sarah with something that wasn't quite awe and wasn't quite suspicion, like she was trying to decide if she was in the presence of genius or witchcraft. "You aimed at empty desert," she said quietly. "I saw the shot placement on the range card. You were aiming 20 feet left of the road and 450 feet ahead of where the target was. That's not shooting, that's prophecy." Webb just laughed, but it was the kind of laugh that came from accepting something your brain couldn't quite process. "I don't even want to know how you did it. Some things are better left mysterious. Some things you just nod and say, 'Nice shot,' and move on with your life. Because if you think about them too hard, you start questioning everything you thought you knew about the universe." But Sarah knew it wasn't prophecy or magic or divine intervention. It was preparation, meeting opportunity. It was 10,000 hours of practice compressed into a single trigger pull. It was every deer her father had made her shoot at ranges that seemed impossible. It was every qualification course where she'd pushed herself past what she thought were her limits. It was every competition where she'd studied the wind until she could read it like language. All of that had been preparation for a moment she hadn't known was coming, for a shot that was written in her muscle memory and bone-deep instinct before she'd even been born. Or maybe she'd just gotten lucky. Maybe the universe had decided just this once to bend the rules in her favor. She'd never know for sure, and that uncertainty would follow her like a shadow. That night, alone in her quarters, Sarah sat on her bunk and stared at her hands. They'd stopped shaking hours ago, but she could still feel the phantom vibration, like an echo of adrenaline that her body couldn't quite let go. She thought about Colonel Kassem, about how he'd spent the last 16 months believing himself untouchable, protected by distance and armor and the sheer improbability of anyone being able to reach him. She thought about the 4,000 people he'd killed, about the villages he'd gassed, about the children who died choking on air that had been turned into poison, and she thought about the bullet, her bullet hand-loaded and carefully crafted, that had traveled nearly 2 miles to find him. In some ways it felt like justice, in other ways it felt like chance. The truth was probably somewhere in between, in that gray space where human agency and cosmic randomness intersected. She cleaned her rifle that night, even though it didn't need cleaning. The bore brush sliding through the barrel. The oil worked into the action. The scope checked and rechecked for 0. It was ritual meditation, a way of processing what she'd done without having to think about it directly. The rifle had performed flawlessly. It deserved respect and care. It deserved to be ready for the next impossible shot whenever that might come. Sleep didn't come easily. When it finally did, she dreamed of wind, and distance and bullets that curved through the air like they had consciousness, like they knew where they needed to go and would find their way there, no matter what. She dreamed of her father teaching her to shoot in the Montana mountains, his voice calm and patient as he explained how to read the wind by watching grass bend and trees sway. She dreamed of the convoy, of the SUV swerving at exactly the right moment to turn her miss into a hit, and in the dream she couldn't tell if she'd aimed for where he was or where he would be or somewhere in between. When she woke up, she still didn't have answers, but she was okay with that. Some shots you made because you knew they'd work. Some shots you made because they needed to be made, regardless of probability. And sometimes the universe met you halfway, bending the rules just enough to turn impossible into inevitable. 2 weeks later, Sarah stood in a cemetery outside Arlington, attending the funeral of one of Colonel Kassem's victims, a young girl, 9 years old, who'd survived the initial chemical attack, but whose lungs had been too damaged to sustain life. She'd held on for 8 months, breathing through machines before her body finally gave up. The family had somehow learned that Sarah was the one who'd killed Kassem, and they'd invited her. She almost didn't go. What do you say to people whose daughter is dead? What comfort can you offer when you've killed the man responsible but can't bring back what they lost? But she went anyway because not going felt like cowardice. The girl's mother took Sarah's hand after the service, her grip surprisingly strong. "Thank you," she said in careful English, each word weighted with more emotion than Sarah could process. "Thank you for making him pay. Thank you for making sure he can't hurt anyone else." Sarah wanted to say that payment wouldn't bring her daughter back, that vengeance was cold comfort compared to the warmth of a child's laugh. But she just nodded, because sometimes people needed to believe that justice meant something, that actions had consequences, that the scales could be balanced even when the price was unbearable. That night, she sat on the porch of her father's house in Montana, listening to wind move through the pine trees. It sounded different here than it did in Afghanistan, softer, less hostile, carrying the smell of sap and earth, instead of dust and diesel. Her father sat beside her in his rocking chair, saying nothing, just present. "Mom would be proud," he finally said, his voice quiet enough that she almost missed it over the wind. "It was one shot, Dad. It was the shot that mattered." He was silent for a moment, rocking slowly. "You know, when I taught you to shoot all those years ago, I never imagined you'd end up doing what you do. I thought maybe you'd be a hunting guide like me, or a competition shooter, something normal. Nothing normal about shooting deer at 600 yards before breakfast." He smiled at that. "Maybe not, but you always had something special. You understood wind and distance and time in ways I never could teach. You just saw it, felt it, like it was a language only you could speak. Or maybe I just got lucky. Luck is what people call skill when they don't want to admit someone's better than them. You earned that shot through 10,000 hours of practice, through every cold morning waiting for elk, through every competition you won, through every impossible target I made you hit just to see if you could. That wasn't luck. That was you." Sarah wanted to believe him, but she'd been there. She'd felt the wind shift at the last second, seen the target swerve into her bullet path, watched as probability and chance and cosmic randomness all aligned in ways they statistically shouldn't have. That had to be luck. It had to be, didn't it? 6 months passed. Sarah rotated back to the States, took 30 days of leave, then reported to Fort Bragg for her next assignment. Life moved forward because that's what life did. The shot became part of her record, analyzed and studied and debated in sniper schools and tactical courses. People argued about skill versus luck, about divine intervention versus random chance, about whether such a shot could ever be duplicated. The ballistic data was examined by experts who produced papers with titles like Extreme Range Engagement, Analysis and Probability Matrices in Long-Distance Marksmanship. Sarah didn't read any of them. She didn't need to. She'd been there. She knew what she'd done, even if she didn't fully understand how she'd done it. What she did understand was that she'd been given a gift. Not the gift of making an impossible shot, but the gift of being in a position to attempt it. 3 other shooters had missed, and their misses had created the conditions for her success. If Webb hadn't spooked the convoy, if Reeves hadn't forced them into evasive patterns, if Chen hadn't pushed them to maximum speed, Sarah's shot would have been even more impossible than it already was. She hadn't succeeded alone. She'd succeeded because 3 other highly skilled people had failed in exactly the right ways. That was the thing about impossible shots, she realized. They were never really about one person. They were about systems and teams and preparation and all the invisible work that happened before the trigger got pulled. Her shot had taken 5.2 seconds to reach the target, but in a way it had taken her entire life to make it. Every lesson from her father, every hour on the range, every deployment, every mission, every moment of training and practice and preparation. The bullet had flown for 5.2 seconds. The shot had been 31 years in the making. 1 year after the shot, Sarah found herself back in Afghanistan, training a new generation of snipers at a range outside Kabul. She was teaching them about wind and distance and the mathematics of extreme range shooting. But more than that, she was teaching them about patience and preparation and the willingness to attempt shots that seemed impossible. "The thing you have to understand," she told them, a group of 20 soldiers who looked impossibly young, "is that impossible is just a word people use for things they haven't figured out yet. Every shot that's considered routine today was once considered impossible. Someone had to be the first person to make it. Someone had to stand at the edge of what was known and take one step further. A young corporal raised his hand. "Captain Mitchell, is it true you made a kill at 2900 meters on a moving target?" Sarah smiled. "Is that what they're saying?" "Yes, ma'am. They say you made a shot that 3 other snipers missed. They say it was impossible." "Then let me tell you what really happened." She paused, making sure she had everyone's attention. "I made a shot that had a 0.3% chance of success, which means that if I took that exact same shot 1,000 times, I'd probably miss 997 of them. I didn't make an impossible shot. I made a shot that was statistically improbable but mathematically possible. And the only reason it worked is because I'd spent my entire life preparing for that exact moment, even though I didn't know it was coming. So it was skill, not luck? It was both, and neither. It was preparation meeting opportunity. It was training meeting necessity. It was a lifetime of practice compressed into 5.2 seconds of bullet flight. She looked at each of them, these young soldiers who would soon be facing their own impossible shots. "Here's what I want you to remember. You can't control luck. You can't control weather or wind or whether your target decides to swerve at the last second, but you can control your preparation. You can control your training. You can control whether you're ready when your moment comes. Do that. And the universe might just decide to meet you halfway." She worked with them for 3 months, teaching everything she knew about extreme range shooting. Some of them would go on to make shots almost as difficult as hers. Some would never fire at anything beyond 1,000 meters. But all of them would carry forward the lesson that impossible was just another word for improbable, and improbable just meant you needed to prepare harder. When her deployment ended, Sarah returned to Montana. She'd been offered a teaching position at the sniper school in Fort Benning, and she'd accepted. No more deployments, no more combat zones, just teaching the next generation how to make the shots that needed to be made, impossible or otherwise. Her father said it was a good decision, that she'd done her part and earned the right to step back. She wasn't sure about that, but she was sure that she had things to teach, knowledge to pass on, lessons learned in wind and dust and the space between heartbeats. On her last night before reporting to Fort Benning, she sat on the porch with her father one more time. The wind was blowing down from the mountains, carrying the first hints of autumn. It moved through the valley in patterns she could read like text, eddies and currents and flows that told her about temperature and pressure, and the invisible architecture of moving air. "I'm proud of you," her father said. "Not because of that shot in Afghanistan. I'm proud because you took what I taught you and made it yours. You took something simple, hitting a target at distance, and turned it into something that saved lives. That's not luck, that's purpose." Sarah didn't respond immediately. She just watched. The wind bend the grass, watched the trees sway, watched the clouds race across the darkening sky. She thought about the shot, about Qasem, about the little girl buried outside Arlington, about all the shots she'd made, and all the shots she'd missed, and all the shots she'd never taken because the moment wasn't right. "I think about it sometimes," she finally said. "That shot. I wonder if I really made it, or if the universe just decided to bend the rules for me that day. I wonder if I aimed at the right place or the wrong place that turned out to be right. I wonder if I could ever do it again." Her father stopped rocking. "Does it matter?" "I don't know, maybe. Probably. Let me tell you something your grandfather told me when I was about your age. He said, some shots you make because you know they'll work. Some shots you make because they need to be made. And some shots you make because not taking them would be worse than missing. You took a shot that needed to be made. You prepared for it your entire life without knowing it. And when the moment came, you didn't hesitate. That's all that matters." They sat in silence as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple and deep blue. The wind continued to blow, indifferent to human concerns, following patterns that Sarah had spent her life learning to read. And somewhere in that wind, in the space between preparation and opportunity, between skill and chance, between the possible and the impossible, she found something that felt like peace. Now let me talk to you directly, because this story isn't just about a woman who made an impossible shot in the Afghan desert. This story is about every impossible thing you've ever faced or will face. It's about those moments when the universe puts something in front of you and says, "This can't be done," and you have to decide whether to believe it. Sarah Mitchell wasn't superhuman. She was just someone who'd spent her entire life preparing for a moment she didn't know was coming. She practiced when it was inconvenient. She trained when she was tired. She pushed past what she thought were her limits because her father taught her that limits were just suggestions, not facts. And when her impossible moment arrived, when 3 other highly skilled people had failed, and the weight of the mission fell on her shoulders, she was ready. Not because she knew she'd succeed, but because she'd done the work that made success possible. Here's what I need you to understand. You have impossible shots coming in your life. Not with rifles, maybe, but with choices, with opportunities, with moments where every rational voice says this won't work, and something deeper whispers, but what if it could? When those moments come, you won't succeed because you're lucky or because the universe owes you a favor. You'll succeed because you put in the work when nobody was watching, because you prepared during the times when preparation seemed pointless, because you learned to read the wind, even when there was no target in sight. Sarah made that shot because 3 other people missed. Their failures created the conditions for her success. In your life, you'll see others fail. You'll see people who are more skilled, more experienced, more credentialed than you attempt something and fall short. And then your moment will come. The question isn't whether you'll be the best, or the luckiest, or the most talented. The question is whether you'll be ready, because here's the truth that nobody wants to say out loud. Most impossible things stay impossible, because nobody's willing to attempt them. Most shots don't get taken because people see the distance and the wind and the odds and decide it's not worth trying. But impossible is just another word for improbable, and improbable just means you need to prepare harder, aim more carefully, and trust that the 10,000 hours of practice will matter when it counts. Sarah aimed at empty desert and killed a moving target at nearly 2 miles. Was it skill? Was it luck? Was it divine intervention? The answer is yes. It was all of those things and none of them. It was what happens when preparation meets opportunity, when training meets necessity, when someone who's done the work gets handed a moment and doesn't waste it. Your impossible shot is coming. Maybe it's tomorrow. Maybe it's 10 years from now. Maybe it's a career opportunity that seems out of reach. Maybe it's a creative project that feels too ambitious. Maybe it's a relationship that seems too good to be true. Maybe it's a dream that everyone says is unrealistic. When that moment arrives, you won't succeed because you're special. You'll succeed because you prepared when it was difficult, practiced when it was inconvenient, and refused to accept that impossible meant never. 3 snipers missed. Then she made history. Not because she was better than them, but because she was there, ready, when the universe aligned for exactly 5.2 seconds. Your moment won't last much longer than that. The question is, will you be ready when it comes? The wind is always blowing. The target is always moving. The distance is always too far. Take the shot anyway.